Hello, my name is Lisa Carnegie. I work at the Heron City Library, and in our oral history project we are having our second interview with Mr. Sam Stotlar, a longtime resident of Heron. Even though you live in Marion now, we still take you, we claim you. Okay, again, if you would, tell us your full name.
Well, my real full name is Samuel David Stotlar. Is my, I guess, official name would be. I go by Sam, and named after my great-grandfather, Samuel Stotlar, who was the first one to come to Heron's Prairie in 1856. So we've been around on this soil here in Heron for a few years. The family has, anyway.
Yes, you've definitely got roots in Heron. And what is your birthday?
Birthday is tomorrow, September 27th, is my birthday.
Well,
born in 1927, so just after about the time they hanged Charlie Berger here in Franklin County, so I started off at a good time.
Well, happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
A day early. As I was telling you earlier, I reviewed our last interview, and we kind of left off at White City Park. We were going to talk about White City and the big bands, and what do you remember about that time, and do you remember some of the performers that were here and played?
Yes, I do. I'm very familiar with that. My older brother, Arwen, he's 4 years older than I am, and he played the trumpet, played in the Heron Band, and was a very good trumpet player. He played in the Army later. But he was up on all that, so I got it secondhand, if not firsthand, for most of it. But all during the 30s, I'd say, and early into the 40s, 41 or 2, before the war really got started and all the young men left, the White City Park over on, it started at the 500 block of North 17th Street, and it was just south of the North Side School. They had about a square block in there. They had one big dance hall that was a very large high room, and it was an extremely large dance floor, so that you could really probably hold 500 people out there if you needed to. And of course, attached to that, John Marlowe, the Marlowe family here in town, and had two brothers, George and Jim, were also effective in the theater business, and they were in the entertainment business. They were #1 people in entertainment here. They had not only the Hippodrome Theater, which they showed the movies, the big movies, but we also had, they had the dance hall out there called the White City Park, and they had an area there. In the 20s, they had ball shooting galleries, sort of like a carnival effect. They had rides out there, and they had the largest swimming pool in this part of the state anyway. They had a large swimming pool there that they used artesian wells to put the water in. So you didn't have to worry about the lakes or the ponds to get the water from around here, that much water. They had their own well. So I sort of grew up in that swimming pool back in the 30s. They had a high dive there. They had 3 sections, 2 feet of water, 4 feet of water area, with 2 big sliding boards, and then they had, at the end, they had a 10-foot deep, which was plenty deep to dive. One end was a 3-meter diving board, or was a 1-meter diving board, and on the other end was a scaffold, big scaffold, which you had a 3-meter, or 3 yards, in most people's mind, 3 yards high diving board, and a 20-foot diving board. And I learned to dive off of all those at a ripe age of 9 years old and 10. I had to keep up with a 4-year-old brother, older than me, and so we had a big time swimming in the swimming pool until about 1942 when it closed that. They kept the dance hall open afterwards, all during the wartime. They kept it open, and we had local bands that played, plus the big bands. I guess just about all of them had been here. We had Ted Weems and Benny Goodman and Tommy Darcy had played here, and Cab Calloway had played here, and trying to think a few others, but just about, if you name it, they had played here, all but Glenn Miller. And I remember my brother laughing. John was wanting him to come in and offered him, I've got 5,000 or 10,000 just for an odd day weekend. He said, well, I'll send my drummer and my trumpet player over for that. So he wasn't too impressed in coming to Heron, Illinois at that time to play. Although, of course, you know, he died during the war years. Never got back a chance to come back here. So it was a place that everybody could go and dance. They come from Evansville, Indiana, for as far south as Cairo, clear to St. Louis to see these bands, because it was a big dance hall, and they'd dance all night there. And they had a large bar across one whole end of the dance floor, and it was just a fun place to go to. And everybody knew where it was. All you had to do was say White City Park and Heron. They know right where to come at that time.
Something along the same line that I've just been curious about, and actually today it occurred to me that you might be able to answer the question for me. I grew up in the north end of Heron.
Okay.
And I have a recollection of some kind of amusement place behind, let's see, it would have been west of North Park.
I know right where you're talking about. The CB&Q railroad tracks right at the diagonal at the north past Heron Street. Used to be then the town, then we expanded the city limits later out about, that was the 800 block, so they went about another 8 blocks north, I'm sorry, to the city limits. But that area was Oscar Lindsay. The Lindsays had a big coal loading room. Although we had coal and everybody went to the mines to get coal in trucks and so forth, he had a coal yard and had all the different grades of coal. Just north of that was an area that had, the carnivals used to come in there. And it was a big field to start with, about 2 blocks off of Highway 148 going north, 2 blocks west to 3 blocks. And this field they would always set up, usually carnivals would set up there all the time, and kids, everybody come by, see a carnival. At one time, believe it or not, we had a tri-motor airplane landed there. And that was like the Ford car company used to make airplanes. And this was in the 30s or the early, before 40s. I was still very young. And I remember that guy landed that tri-motor plane, 3-motor plane with a Cargate aluminum. You see it. The Germans had a Junker airplane just like it. And it was made up in Detroit for the Ford Motor Company. And they landed there. And you could get a ride, I think, for $2 or something, take a ride. I don't know how, but my mother put me on there. Ordinarily, mothers wouldn't do that. But she had always liked to have flown herself. And I was interested in flying, so she put me on, and we took off down that old bumpy field and got off and flew around Heron. So, and this was about, I'd say about 1937 or 38 is when we was flying that, before the war really got going in Europe. And it was a nice flight, but it's something you wouldn't think of, but it's a big 3-motored airplane land there. So they had room to do that. Right after the war, the McSpadden brothers put in a big skating rink there, a roller rink, sort of a big tent. And they used to have, after that, right after the war, they had what they called walkathons. Now, I don't know if you ever heard that word before, but
I've seen some ads for them.
It was a deal to, some people could make money. If you could win the dance contest and so forth, like they're having dance contests, if you could win the dance contest and so forth, why, you might make $25, $30, you know, and that was big money. That's a week's work or better in those days. But they would have these walkathons, and you'd stay up for about 3 days, never stop dancing. You'd dance for 3 days. And then they'd pep the music up the middle of 2 in the morning, and everybody have to jitterbug a little and dance, and then they go hang on each other. And that went on for a couple of seasons, but it was interesting. That was out there too. And those fellas, they got a big tent from the Army. They were people had to learn how to do things in those days. We didn't have anything, so they bought a tent from the Army, a big tent, like a fair tent, and put it up to have this thing in. So those were some of the things that happened out in that area there. Later, after the war in about 1950s, we had two big drive-in theaters, two of the largest in the country. On the south end of town was the Smiths put in there, the big one about right where the airport is today. Big theater there, it's supposed to be the largest one in the world or something, you know. And they had wonderful shows, and they had sandwiches, and some of the fellows from Culp would cook barbecues out there and serve them. And it is a Saturday night play, and you park in your car, put the sound inside, and watch the screen. And I know one year, it was early, right after the war, about 47 or 8, they gave a Cadillac convertible away there. Oh, and right. Lo and behold, my sister-in-law, Lorraine Stotlar, won it. And she about fainted when they called her number out. But she won that Cadillac and got to drive it around. So that's a big deal. I mean, they drove that Cadillac around displaying it all summer, and then they had the drawing on the stage. And it was Wayne Smith was his name, and he was quite a promoter. They had little toot railroad out there that they drove the kids around. On the north end, not to be outdone, but John Marlowe put in a drive-in out there, and that's about out where the old ball diamond used to be back in 1918, 1920. They had baseball diamond there, called the Walker Beach Baseball Diamond. We got pictures here in our museum here at the historic libraries in there, showing a 1918 picture of this big wooden stands. And of course, Ray Chapman and Bob Beach, both Heron men, lived just up the street from where we sitting here, about 3 blocks on South 11th Street, where they lived. Beach played for several years in Detroit, outfield in the big league, and Chapman is world famous in that he was a prize for Cleveland Indians played, but he got hit in the head with a baseball, and he's in the Hall of Fame as the only player that ever got killed in a regular big league ball game. During the game, he got hit the temple and he killed him. And he's in the Hall of Fame, and I know a couple of the Chapmans, good friends that I grew up with just up the street from us here. He stopped by the Hall of Fame, and they were just thrilled to death that they talked to his art about wanting to know about him, right, where he lived and so forth. But that was an interesting thing. Anyway, he had the drive-in out there, and that lasted. I don't know when that in the late '60s. Why it started fell out of favor, and then television started coming in big. So that pretty well killed the drive-in theaters. But they lasted for several years here, and we had 2 of the biggest in Southern Illinois right here, or maybe this part of the country. Really great things. That's a fun time, and that was just north, like I say, where this airport, where we flew in the airplane just north of that.
And that's where the Ball Diamond was? That's
where the Ball Diamond was. There used to be a place called the Green Lantern Tavern out there. People live around here would know where that is, and it's right behind that field, the Ball Diamond. I had played there softball in about 1950, 51, 2 or 3, somewhere in there. I'd gotten out of college. And we had big softball games. All the clubs in town, the Oaks Club, the Legion, and all of those had ball teams. And they would, all summer long, have league play. And that's that old diamond still, but the stands were gone, but it was still the Bear Diamond was there at that time that we could play in.
But the History Room has a Facebook page, and we post a lot of old pictures on there. And one that I found that was a really great picture, but I did not realize, was that there were stables at the Heron Park back when the park first was formed.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, to say the right thing, is Wayne Smith, the fellow that would have had the big drive-in theater at the south end of town. They liked to ride horses, and so they had put in those stables. We had several people that had horses. I know Pete Marlowe, here and his wife were liked horses, and several other people here in town had horses, and they put those stables out on the north end of the city park, and they could ride around. Later, they organized the riding to the hounds. They formed a club around here, and some are still a member here in town, that went south of Crab Orchard Lake down in those hills, and they would chase fox. Regular in their outfits and suits, and have parties and all that stuff, and people from St. Louis and Evansville and everywhere out, clubs, similar club would come and visit and do it. So they're still doing that. And it's sort of an outgrowth. Some of the people, well, Wayne was in charge of the dogs, you know, the hounds. And they used foxhounds, as large beagle hounds look like. And they did everything that you would see in England with the riding and chasing the hounds. So it was quite popular then, but that was sort of an outcrop from that. Of course, they had at the Williamson County Fairgrounds had stables over there, but that was really a start of that group that started riding those horses there.
Heron just had a lot of things going on back then, entertainment-wise, and we had touched on industry. We were going to talk about a little bit about all the industry that was here at one time. Can you think of some of the factories that were running, like in the 50s?
Well, just what you said was very true. We were very fortunate in Heron. Is actually where the coal is that really took off. It started in Carterville, 6 miles away, and the coal was deep, it's 6 to 8 feet deep, and the coal veins larger than anywhere else in the country. And it was a high quality, although it was soft coal, had sulfur, some sulfur in it. It was a high quality coal. And at one time we had 15 mines just surrounding Heron, so Heron really took off as the central coal center in the United States. At one time, the coal production was the largest. Then Franklin County, later, they kept moving farther north and the coal lines got deeper. But Heron was really the central part of this part of the country, furnishing fuel and energy. That's what we're going to talk about, energy. In fact, we got a town named Energy. Although it was for the powder plant down there that used to black powder, made black powder, Olin Corporation, to blow the coal up under the ground, and then they'd shovel it up and take it out. But we had a lot of people that were early members of this area, some in my family and many families that have been around here just as the Civil War and after. There's foreign banks and everything. And we had a big theater here at one. My mother always mentioned, my mother and father both are lifelong residents of Heron. And Madam Schumanheit was her name. My mother always mentioned, I didn't know she was a famous New York opera star and sung all over the world. She had sung in one of our theaters here. There's some old pictures in the thing of that big theater right on Park Avenue. She had sung here. And they used to have all kinds of groups would come around and sing in groups like that. And then we had the ball teams. And then we had the White City Park, all that entertainment. And it just grew up to be a lot of people came here. We had newspapers that real fine. Hal Trevilian down here right on South 13th, 4 blocks south of us here, was one of the finest newspapers, personal newspapers, and he had a printing press that was the last registered private printing press in the United States. He operated there. These people came in from other areas and had great ideas. So it was a great time of a lot of people in this small community that really were on the ball, as we say today. They had good ideas and they made them work. They were hard workers and had great ideas and was able to produce. They could get things done. And I'm proud to be a part of a town like this because they lasted here longer by being smart in thinking about, you said, the industry. Well, the coal industry had died during the war. They pretty well used coal up. Diesel engines were coming in about that time, so the diesel fuel was, oil fuel would run the diesel. So coal was going down because the coal was all they used for years. It took a lot of coal. In fact, Madison 12 Mines west of us was owned by the Illinois Central Railroad. They just bought the mines for their coal just to use on their trains. All of this started descending a little. The depression hit in the 30s. Part of it was because they used less coal, and they were becoming more mechanized. So naturally they didn't need as many men as they used to working the coal mines. So that put a lot of people out of work, and they migrated to Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit. A lot went to Detroit to the motor industry up there, the car industry. They were used to working the heavy equipment, so they could do that. Mr. O.W. Larley, which is well registered, he was one of the school teachers here in town. He lived right across the street over on South 11th, in the 200 block of South 11th. Joe V. Walker lived across the street, had the clothing stores, and he got the idea that we've got to do something to keep the people here. We've got a nice population, but the coal's working out, and they had enough sense to know coal wasn't going to last forever. So they said, we've got to see about getting some other industries. We got the manpower, people that know how to work hard, and to bring them in here. So they went out to, went up in the Detroit area, and they got the Norge Corporation out of Michigan to come down and talk them into putting a washing machine plant here. And they put the plant where we're sitting right now, just 2 blocks away, was the old Stotlar farm, part of it. It was 120 acres in the southeast corner of town. And so they brought them down, showed them what we could do. We have Southern Illinois University over here at that time, could help them train people and do stuff like that, because they had mechanical training out here at what we call VTI program out east of Carbondale to train workers with. So they came with the idea, why not put that plant here? So Mr. Lyle Artis was the general manager, came here. They liked what they saw the potential of the work, and so they decided to come down. One of the reasons we got that plant sitting right here in the middle of town is that the city of Heron sits on solid coal, just the city itself, a mile long and a half mile wide. There's coal under here. Everything else was undermined around, and naturally these big plants are going to put their plant on an underground mine that can sink, you know, in time they will sink. So that was the reason we had the place here that you could put that plant, and the railroads were already here for the coal mines, so they had all the rail service, which was important for shipping. So anyway, they picked that spot right down ironically, a half a block from Mr. O.W. Larley lived, and Mr. Joe Walker lived, and I lived. My dad, we lived in the next block, and the back alley was a 10-acre field there that they used to plow with horses. They used to plow with horses and single plows early on, but they put in that plant there. They put Norge. Well, when Norge came, then they got Smoller Brothers sitting right behind us down the tracks here, place for the women to work. And so they started making dresses there. And they made those for many, many years there, the dresses. And the next thing you know, the south of us was during the war, well, of course, they built Crab Orchard Lake, and it finished in 1940. It's a beautiful big lake, and 12 miles long and 5 miles wide. Plenty of water for any kind of industry. Well, during the war, they made landmines there and several other things. So it was a natural design for the powder industry, which is a dangerous thing. So they had plenty of room to spread out their operation. If one section would have an explosion or something, why, it didn't hurt anything. They were out in the fields and designed that way. So those were built during the war, so we had an industrial park there, which was part of the design of having that lake, was to have an industrial for the work, for the people. So we had one of the first ones that came in there were the explosive people, like Olin Corporation came in there. And they've been there, they were there, in fact, they're still out there under the name of General Dynamics now, but they've been there all these years, from 1940s to the present. And so they had explosives. There was U.S. Powder out there, did a similar thing. Universal Match Company came out of St. Louis. They made matches, of course, with phosphorus and other dangers. They set up out there. Then coming out of Springfield, Illinois, we got Sangamo Electric Company. It was one of the early ones. And of course, that would, men or women could work on the electronic things of, they did phones and other things like that they built on the south side of the lake. So they came in. Then we had the Digraph Bradley Company, came out of St. Louis, and they operated on the southeast section. Then they made a stenciling, had stenciling machines and made stencils that you do to stenciling then. And they, many years they just left here not too long ago. So we got all of that in that industrial park. It was all set with rails were already in, all the rails set up with the IC railroad and run north and south and all over the United States. So we had a natural setting here. And that got started. Then Heron kept expounding. In about 1951, we got Allen Industries. And Allen was a big plant coming out of Detroit, and they made panels for doors, did the paneling work and skylighting work, and they also made carpets. They used matting and so forth for the carpet. You lay a carpet, you put a mat on it, they made all that stuff. So that was a big company that would have 12 to 1,500 people working there. So we had all these people at once working, and was absorbing all that, all those people that would have had to have left if we hadn't have done it. To the north of us, we have West Frankfort, Benton, all big coal companies, and all big towns. And in fact, Frankfort is a little larger than us. But they said, we've got coal, we don't need anything else. Well, they did for a little while. They had the largest mines in the world over there in 1950. They had the explosion. Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the first woman to ever go down the mines, went down that mine shaft right there in West Frankfort. They had 2 shafts that were so big. And all during the war and the end of the war was the largest producing mines in the whole world. So they lasted a lot longer out in that direction. And farther north, we kept going farther north, clear up a Wren Lake, which we know of today as Big Lake. So all of this evolved because of an idea of a couple of men here in Heron, and there was several of them, and you can get the story here in our history section on our Chamber of Commerce. It was one of the finest, because we had men that had vision. And not only did they have a vision, but they did something about it. And it takes more inertia to get a ball rolling. After it gets rolling, it's lots easier. We did have, of course, Heron was always known for strong unions. And the reputation in the past that we've studied about was the forming of the United Mine Workers Union. Well, these men knew that, so in advance they got with the union workers, and some of the people in the Chamber of Commerce were carpenters, belonged to the carpentry and so forth, and said, look, if these men are going to come, they're going to come in here, we've got to keep them working, because the way we got them to come in, every person in this town became a part of it. We had to all gather money and buy the plant and put it, and they bought it back from us, from the people of this town. Would invest, like buying a bond, and they'd pay off the bond. That's the way Allen Industry did. They came in, put their plant in, and we would pay for the plant. Well, if they walked away from that plant, we had an empty plant there. So it was only natural that it was to the benefit of all of us that everybody kept working, and they did. To prove the point, Narge was here over 60 years. That's unheard of, a manufacturing plant in one spot for 60 years. So all the people worked hard, the labor worked together with management, and they made things work. So it was really an active time, although during the 60s up to the 2000.
I actually got that closing date. It was Whirlpool when it closed. And
Oh, yeah.
It was December 31st, 2006.
2006 is what we would call large. It went through 2 or 3 phases of names. Whirlpool, Magic Chef was in there, and but Whirlpool was the final owner, and then the last to buy it before they left here. So that was unbelievable that you could come in 1946 into this area. It was just a coal mine area and nothing else much, and then all these years that plant, and it expanded, doubled its size, went to 20-acre plant, and still operated. So we were very fortunate to have that. Of course, in 2006, this period of time, we had plants working all that time, and it seemed like 2006, that's when everybody started going to Mexico. They started going all over the world, outsourcing their plants. And not only us, but the whole United States felt this. Now the movement's trying to get some of these plants back and get people working. And it's too bad the universal match, container stapling farther out on the IC tracks west of town, they closed the same year. And then one of the stapling plants, I think, closed that year. So we had those same plants virtually for 40 to 60 years here in Heron. So that shows you that this town was workers, they're hard workers, and they stayed here. Right. Some of the people lived here all their life through this. And it's very few towns you get people to stay all that time.
That's true, and raise their families.
Raise their families and so on.
So we talked about the factories. I have one, just a curiosity. Do you remember when the prison came in at Marion? I mean, I read about Marion Prison in books, it's mentioned.
I remember it very well. Came in about 1961 or 2. They came in here. They started laying the foundations out in the prison. Well, the prison, this is again at the lake around Crab Orchard Lake is a wildlife refuge, they call it, and the Fish and Wildlife of the United States, Fish and Wildlife Organization, run this area. But we have a lot of ground on it. There's almost 12 miles long and 6 mile wide piece of ground there. That's a big piece of ground. And in the middle was the lake, and on the south end on the east end was the commercial industrial park, and on the west end was the lake recreation, the dam down there. Although no private buildings were put on that lake. Nothing like a big pavilion or a hotel or anything. They were not allowed to build anything on that federal ground. But that started divided about half and half. Well, the prison had all of this ground down there, so instead of going out and buying, it was remote. It was private. Nobody was allowed in those areas, so it made a perfect place for the maximum security prison. So it's about 1960 they started working on that. Now that was another big thing that happened here. We just gotten up to 1960. Heron had won the state basketball tournament, and everybody in the country in the state of Illinois knew where Heron was, and they had good basketball teams, all of them around here. And so that was just a start. So the prison came in, and they started building. It took them about 2.5 years to build that prison. And I was lucky being in the building business. We'd furnish stuff out there, although it was mostly concrete and steel, the roofs and some of that. And I'd had the opportunity to get out at the prison and walk over all the roofs and through the cells and everything before they actually brought the people in. So I've sort of grown up knowing that operation. Well, at first they brought in prisoners that were federal, like bank robbers and larceny and stockbrokers that stealing and so forth like that in the first phase of the prison. And then they formed a farm system, which they built these people outside of the main gates where they weren't going to run away. They were in for 1 or 2 years. Some politicians and etc. Was in that. Then the main prison, we had some of the hardest, most intense prisoners there were in the United States. So they had that cells all designed for that purpose. And of course that implied a lot of work for the men down here. That prison was there until about 10 or 12 years, 15 years, 12 years ago. They moved it from the maximum prison out to Colorado, near Pueblo, Denver, Colorado, Pueblo, Colorado, down the south of Colorado, put this maximum prison. They had spies, they had murderers, they had every kind of political type, strong prisoners, and I guess if we hadn't had Guantanamo Bay down there in Cuba, for a lot of these guys that were bringing in the Arabs and so forth that formed 9/11, that they would have been in that prison. We had a couple of prison escapes, which you think is unusual, but one of them was, one of the guys was a master electrician, electronic guy. He could do that. They found out how to unlock the locks, the electric. They were as smart as the guy that built the gates and the doors that had automatic locks on them. And they had a workshop down there. They manufactured stuff down there in the prison, give them something to do. They worked. So they'd steal pieces here, there, and yonder, and they made electronic, like an electronic door, garage door opener now, believe it or not. And there's about 6 of them that managed to get out, walk right out the front door. They walked right out the front door using the locks, which was remarkable. Well, I remember I was in Champaign the day that happened, and I was on my way home listening to the radio. And they were talking about some of them, it's all wooded around there. It's the east end of Crab Orchard Lake, it's so swampy along that creek back there. And Highway 57, Interstate 57, runs just to the east of the prison about over 3 miles. Well, a couple of them got over there somehow and was able to hitch a ride and got away. Another one, a couple of them, they got caught in the woods. They hid out in the woods. I think there were 6 men, and I forgot where the other one went, but they eventually caught them all and got them back. And then we had another one where a fella had a girlfriend. I think they made a movie on this, or almost like it, out of that prison, because I remember seeing. This girl was going to get them out, so she was flying on the commercial airplanes, and she pulled a gun on the pilots, and they landed at the Marion Airport. And it sat there all day long, that plane, and all the people on it sat there because she had a gun on them. Well, they were even going to try to parachute into the cells and bring them guns and get out. Some way, this doesn't all mesh, but this is far back in this quick memory there on this. But they were able with gunpoint then to get out of the prison and almost got to the airplane. Now this was like 4 or 5 hours they sat out there. The FBI was surrounded the plane. I drove out here, you could see it sitting right on the north end of the runway over there. And everybody had it surrounded and this and that. Well, they almost got away, but somehow she gave in at the last minute, and of course ended up in prison herself for this. But as a hijack it made a great movie deal. The way it did, they did the same thing they'd do in some movie. You say, well, how could they do that? Well, they got it done. There were some sharp guys in that prison. That's why they pulled off some big jobs. That's why they were there. But that was exciting times, you know, that happened. So those are just some of the things that happens around the prisons here.
What other exciting times, we've had a lot of presidents visit this area and visit Heron in particular. Did you happen to meet any of the presidents?
No, I never got to directly meet a president. I was in College University of Illinois in 1948 when Harry Truman came through here. Well, of course, Harry was already defeated. The newspapers had already printed. Dewey was running the Republican Party, that he had won from New York. And Harry, of course, made all the little towns. and stopped and talked here, and I just talking to a friend of mine. He made a big speech at the VA hospital. We've got the big VA hospital in Marion that was put in 1940. Purposely, the war had started, so they knew they'd have a lot of men coming back. But this was 1948 election. Of course, Roosevelt died, and shortly after he had started his third term, and then Harry took over immediately before the war was over, right at the end of the war. So he was running in 1948, and he made all these whistle stops around, and lo and behold, the next morning, they already had, Chicago Tribune already had Dewey wins, all this, and they had to back up the presses and do it over because Harry had, last minute, had pulled it out and won it. Give him hell, Harry, they called him. And Harry Truman won it. But I missed out on seeing him. The other next one that came in here was Gerald Ford. When Watergate took place, and I'm blank here for a second.
Nixon.
Nixon was in. His vice president was Gerald Ford, who was a great senator and from Michigan, real fine guy, and he was running against Jimmy Carter on the Democrat, and he was running at that time. So he came to the Marion Herron Airport, and I was out there and a bunch of people waiting, and he landed his plane, and he didn't make any speeches much, but only at the airport at that time. He came by, and I was walking around, and Bob Gerald's, a lot of people around here knew Bob. I was in school, high school with Bob. He was the mayor of Energy, which is just south of us here, 2 miles. And Bob had his arm wrapped around him like this, leading him around and pointing to this and pointing to that. And to know Bob, he is a talker anyway, good friend of mine. And anyway, he walked by, and Gerald says, "Energy, you're the mayor of Energy." Says, "Where in the world did you get that name?" He said, well, he told him a little bit about the gunpowder and the mines and all. Said, "That's what we need, more energy in this country." And believe it or not, Energy, Illinois, there's only one in the United States. There's no other energy. So that's why he was interested in that. But that was one of the comments that came out of his walk. And he walked right by the crowd from here 10 or 15 feet away by everybody. And we had security, but not like they talk about security today he was the vice president. And of course was running for president, but today you still get the same type of massive security by the FBI on those things. The next one was, let's see, that was in 1980. Ronald Reagan came through.
And John F. Kennedy came here, didn't he? Didn't he come to the airport?
He might have.
Yeah,
I'm sort of blank on that one, and I was around, was here in town at the time, but I didn't remember. He didn't go anywhere. If he did, he might have talked from
I think he landed at Williamson County. I believe Bill went out there.
Yeah, my grandfather took me out there. He was running for president, and I think he just basically stepped off the plane a little bit and talked. And
he must have, because the one that really spent some time in Herron was Ronald Reagan. He came to town. And of course, he's an Illinois boy, grew up in Dixon, Illinois, northern up by Peoria. And we just got our new city hall too. And I forgot what year they built the city hall, but they took the old one, tore it down that whole block. We got the finest city hall our taxpayers can afford. It was at the time they built that. I mean, everybody else had a little old brick building somewhere, and here we had this beautiful building, which is now it's nice to have. And the jail and all of that stuff. But we had that in before Reagan came. Well, Mucci Ottolini was the mayor, and he was the first Italian mayor in the city of Herron. All these years, virtually from 1918, 1919, 1920, after World War I, we had most of our Italian immigrants at that time came into Herron, but he was the first mayor. Now, this was 1980. And Mucci, a real fine guy, he's a good politician, he knew everybody in town, and he did the same thing. I got some pictures. He was in the city hall, our new city hall down here, and he came out this south door, and people were just standing around, same thing. He came out and made a little talk there, Then he came south down Park Avenue, walked right down the middle of Park Avenue. It was all closed off, and Moochie was, of course, he was a big Democrat, but he was showing him all our stores, showing him right and left, and just making him feel at home. So he got down, I know he got down as far as Son's clothing store on Cherry Street. Well, he went and he said, if you got somebody in business here we can talk to, fine. So Harvard's son was there, and he's 2 years older than me, and his dad and his mother and his wife and all the employees they had a couch set up, and Harvard's got this picture still. And Reagan came in and sat down on the couch like we was having a fireside chat like we're talking now, and Mr. Son was sitting here, and all of the employees were there, and he talked to him about how things were going, this, and this. So that was in, he took time to talk to some of the people and other businessmen in town. But he really spent some time in Heron, and I don't know why he spent so much time here, but we've got a beautiful white entrance street, and the businesses are on both sides, so it's pretty much all centralized in one spot at that time. So anyway, he did a great job here. Then since then we've had Bush, not the senior Bush, but I think I get the best of George W.
George W. is the
George
younger
W.
one.
Was out at the airport. I know he came and made a talk at the airport, had a speech, and you could go out there and go hear him. There wasn't much, again, there wasn't much guards or restriction. You could go out there and hear him make his talk and so forth. And maybe there's been another one since. I don't remember after I think he was the last one we had. But I know a very dramatic one. It was in 1964 by out of Arizona, was running for the president. Goldwater was running from Arizona. And he was scheduled to be in Marion, land at the Marion airport on this day. So everybody was over at the old Travel Lodge there. They had the largest opening hall there. And I remember Judge Haney, here in town, younger Judge Haney, who is now deceased. He was the president of the Republican Party in southern Williamson County or something. Anyway, it was all excited. Well, it was a rainy day. It was in the spring, and a rainy day, cloudy. We heard his plane come over 3 times. He couldn't land. We were just socked in so hard he couldn't land. And he was a former Air Force major or colonel during the war. So we were all set, and nothing happened that day. So everybody was all there waiting to see Goldwater when he came into town, and that was in 1964 election, which he would have been running against John Kennedy, but it ended up Gerald Ford.
Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson was the vice president that then ran for president and won that election, the '64 election. So that was one of the big rallies we had. He was going to come into Marion and make a big talk in front of the crowd, but Senator Irvin, what the heck was his name, from the state of Illinois, a U.S. Senator, he always kissed the women. I remember, and the women were lined up. He is a white-headed old statesman. We call him a statesman because he was. But he always, a couple of women I know wanted to go kiss him, and they got in line down to kiss him. Sorry, I can't come up with the last name. I know it plays that name. But that was part. I think he sort of took over. The other guy didn't come, so somebody had to do something. He was there to meet him, greet him, of course, being a senator from Illinois, and a U.S. senator from Illinois. So it was a big day over there in spite of the things.
Well, it seems like that was the good times. I mean, we talked about kind of the crest, winning the state championship in 1957, which, by the way, they're going to have a talk about
tomorrow
that.
night.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night, right here, we'll have that team. Earl Lee's going to be there. I understand he's in a wheelchair, the coach, And John Tidwell and all the guys that played the start for that team are supposed to be here tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. I'm over at the Civic Center.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to going over and renewing some of those.
Well, be sure and go on Friday. Tomorrow, it's not tomorrow.
No,
it's
tomorrow.
The next day.
That's my birthday. I'll be celebrating 2 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they won the championship in '57, and everything's flying high. Got industry, and everything's great. And then Interstate 57 came through.
Right.
I don't know exactly what year it was built. I remember part of it was built when I was, a little
Eisenhower
girl.
started the idea. He had seen Germans' roads that Hitler had built, where you could travel, primarily the army could move. When he looked at things, the United States is made up of little roads like this, no straight roads to any major cities. In case of an attack on the United States, we couldn't move our army from one side of the country to the other. So those autobahns that Hitler had built were fantastic roads. They were so thick that bombs wouldn't even hurt them. So that's where he got the idea to start these, and that was one of his big things that he did do, was the interstate system that you ride on today. They started building that in about, well, he finished office in '58, but it started about that time in different parts of the country. It didn't all happen in 1 year. It took about 6 years or 7 years, maybe longer, for these to all be connected. For instance, Highway 57 was picked a parallel right next to 37 to Chicago. That would where it would go, and go clear to Carroll, and cross the river, and end up in Sikeston, Missouri, where they picked up US 55, Interstate 55. Well, they built it in segments. They built the section over here by, it seemed like it was about 62 or 3, maybe 60, 61, 2. They built this section here. Then they got up by Wren Lake area that Wren Lake was in, and they stopped just before you got to Mount Vernon, about 10 miles south at Bonnie or somewhere along there. They stopped, and you had to go over to 37. Well, they had to build that around the end of Wren Lake and make a whole new highway that dodged Mount Vernon, didn't go downtown like 37. They came around it. And it seemed like it was about 4 years before they got that section open, and where you would go on north. And there were 2 or 3 of those sections, but eventually it took them probably 5 or 6 years to get that one. You could drive from Chicago to Carroll without interruption. So and that was pretty much in all the states was going on at once. The odd numbers were north and south interstates, and the even numbers 70, 80, 70, 10, started 10 at the Gulf of Mexico, went from coast to coast, and all these roads are in now, which we have the luxury of going somewhere, and you can almost set your watch how long it takes you to get there, unless they're back into reconstruction, which they're doing right now. But that was when that started. Now, when that started, it started making people think, well, what I can do. Now, it changed our patterns of shopping. You lived in a town, and you didn't have most people didn't have cars. Well, you went shopping at this store, this grocery store, this men's store, this women's store. Well, all of a sudden, we can jump in that car, and we could be down to Paducah, Kentucky in 45 minutes to an hour. We'd go down there and shop. Or we could be over at Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Or we could be in St. Louis in an hour and 45 minutes. Or we could be in Chicago in 5 hours. Or we could be in Evansville in an hour and a half. So people started then driving and shopping all over the country because it was easier. We had better automobiles. Gasoline was still cheap in those days, probably $1.50, $2 a gallon at the most. And the United States had all the gasoline it wanted. We did not have to import a thing at those times. You don't think about that, but all this Arab stuff started late after the Cold War was over, back in the 90s or back into the 80s, and Jimmy Carter they're trying to get, the Arabs started controlling the gasoline over here. So from about 70 on, we've been under threat of having to bow down to these people to buy gasoline. But before that, the United States had all kinds of gasoline. And big Texas oil, California things, Alaska they discovered that, and it was getting the oils, and then from them. But all that started changing, and that changed our whole outlook on everything. The Cold War went on, and everybody knows the word Cuban crisis. In 1960, when John Kennedy got in, they had the missiles set right in Cuba under Castro, had taken over that country to blow us up. We had the Bay of Pigs where they tried, the Cubans take back their country and they couldn't. But in that interim, we were building bomb shelters here in 1960. You could go in and all up and down the road here to go to Champaign, and they were advertising, come over and look at these bomb shelters where you could go down and stay for a week. And that was a real threat. And luckily we came that close, you know, to being in that war. They had the missiles set and the Russians were ready to set it off. If we'd made any false moves, it was a very precarious times. And from then on up till Reagan finally got them to tear down the Berlin Wall in the latter part of it in 86, 87, 88, just the end of his term, and got that Cold War ended, we lived virtually in a war. Everything was based on what we could do, supplies, and other countries were trying to become communist, and we tried to keep them out and do that. And to this day, we're still doing it, and probably went overboard, did too much of that, and cost us too much money to keep armed forces overseas all the time. But those were the times that we reached those apexes. From then on, we had recessions. We had a recession after the Watergate thing. With that, in 1992 we had a recession, but from about 1990 was the biggest housing boom in the history of this country. For 15 years we had low interest rates, lowest they'd ever been, and now they're down to 3 and 4%, which is unheard of. So there's been that boom up till this last 3 or 4 years that people are frightened and out of job. That's when we started exporting all our jobs here at first of the 2000s, started putting them outsourcing to every country in the world. So it's been a different America in the last 12 or 15 years, really. And we're into those times right now with another election coming that's going to be very important to this nation, of which direction we're going to go. So those are some of the things we've been through, but we did have our plants during most of this period of time, in spite of all the threats from the other parts of the world. And the Vietnam War came, you know, at the late 60s. The Martin Luther King and all of these things happened, and this country has been a different direction, back and forth and so forth. So we're in the mix of a very important time in our lives, and Heron is, since all the factories have gone. So it's a hope that we can come up some way, we can do something, either get plants back here and so forth, to keep our populace here for the future.
Well, actually, I'm sure you're aware of it, but there are some town meetings scheduled. I've received emails about it. It's called It's Happening in Heron, and they're going to discuss different ideas, try to be creative and think of what they can do looking towards the future, and try to get people to come into Heron.
I wasn't just aware they'd actually gotten down to doing this, but that's what you got to do.
They've got some meetings scheduled, and
somebody has some real good ideas that are practically being put into effect.
And, you know, maybe we should have a look back at what those guys were thinking back when it worked before, and you know, put our own spin on it, but try to come up with some ideas. I just wondered if you have any suggestions something that you think would, I mean, other than being open to listening to ideas from everybody, which is what they're really trying to do. They're trying to get everyone to come, and if you've got an idea, no matter how silly you think it is, you know, spit it out.
Well, I hadn't really put it to thought at that time, but But we all need to be seeing what we can do with the situations we've got. Recreation seems to be our best bet. And of course, if this bond issue that they got over in Marion, the only one in the state like it, to bring a big water complex and so forth, shopping deal over there that we can draw in. We can draw in people because we have all kinds of things to offer besides that.
Right.
We've got all the beautiful forests and all the beautiful parks and all the lakes. My goodness, we're the land of lakes here. And fishing, the recreation, we just got to let people find out we're here and to really work at that, because that's our best bet, is to bring money in from tourism. And we've got lots to offer them here that other people, the rest of the state's just cornfields, you know.
Right.
There's not a lot to see or a lot to spend any time doing unless you got clear to Chicago. And then nobody wants to be in these cities anymore. You have to see the traffic and keep you out of them anymore, mostly. But
yeah, we want to bring them to the whole area, I think, is
that's
we can
right.
all work
With
together.
the fairs, the Decoin fairs, and all of these things, I think the tourism is going to be one of our things, like Gatlinburg and all that. I've been down around that, and it just swarms in there every weekend. There's thousands of people going in there. And all they do is shop and ride rides and play games, spend money. That's what we want them to do.
That's right. Well, I think we're running out of time.
Sure.
But I sure have enjoyed this
Well,
interview.
I hope it hadn't been too boring. Most things like this, as maybe some of the earlier area around here, but it's been an interesting time. And without just sort of in a closing thing, I've seen kids come back to school. Come back to Heron and visit to these class reunions. We're having a big one coming up now, this 57 reunion and all of this. Every person I've ever seen said those were the best times of our lives, because everybody knew each other. Nobody had to lock the doors. You could send your kids downtown and back without thinking they're going to get kidnapped. Everybody, in spite of, there wasn't a lot of money circulating, but everybody had a good time. Our schools were excellent, had excellent sports and stuff to entertain us. We've got all these beautiful lakes that are touched for fishing, boating, and it was just a good time to be in Heron, Illinois, and Heron has been good all of these years to those people that lived here. I don't think you'll get an objection to that for every one of them, even when times were the toughest. It was still, compared to where you do and where you go today, of how people are, and people are always great here in Heron. So I think as a close, that's a wonderful tribute to the people that have worked here and lived here all these years. And I know I certainly feel that way. I came back and this was home and always has been. And
there's a pride. There's a pride of having grown up in Heron. Well, that's going to be it for our oral history interview with Mr. Stotlar. And once again, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the library. You're our second oral history participant, and we certainly appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Have a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Okay, real good.
All right.
Thank you again.